I want to talk today about these 5 modules you see in front of you. They're all from Mutable Instruments, and they are the plates, plats, rings, marbles, stages, and veils. In that order is how I purchased them. Plates was my very first module I ever purchased, along with rings in the same order, on July 12th, 2021. This was my introduction to modular, and I'll tell you what, Plaits has been a fantastic module. It still is. It is still a fantastic module, even compared to everything else, especially with that final update from Mutable Instruments before they closed their doors at the end of 2022. I think it was the end of 2022. Again, in that first order was plates and rings. Shortly after that came marbles, because I needed some kind of random voltage generation going on. Followed then by stages, because I understood it has 6 LFOs in it, along with a ton of other features, but I mostly used it as LFOs in the beginning. And then when I branched beyond Mutable Instruments, the next oscillator I got was Ensemble. And Ensemble didn't have a built-in VCA like Plaits does, so I couldn't figure out how to shut it up. I cried to Reddit, help me, I don't know how to shut this thing up, and someone said, dummy, you need VCAs. And so Veils came in shortly thereafter. So these are pretty much primarily the first modules I ever purchased to start this journey. And I will say I use Plaits. I believe I use Plaits in almost every single thing that I do, either as a lead solo kind of voice or as a bass line or something like that. I don't really wander into too many of the voices. Like there's a lot of waveforms in here, but I really kind of stick with just a couple and use it that way, because that's just what I do. The next one that gets used pretty much all the time is marbles. Marbles and rings together. Take marbles into rings into a reverb, and reverb out to the mixer, and I could listen to that all day. It's just a nonstop, generative, beautiful soundscape that comes out of just these 2 modules alone. It's fantastic. So these are probably part of my favorites in the rack overall of the things I have. And then of course, you use LFOs to slowly modulate various parameters. So modulating rings or plates parameters here, or these other options, and or self-patching. Of course, it's another option to do with all these. So stages wound up being primarily, I used it as LFOs, slow LFOs. I did upgrade the firmware to use the super slow LFOs, because I'd wanted that. That was before I bought Batumi, which is over here. And then finally, last but not least, is of course Veils, which I find that I use Veils for 2 purposes. Primarily, I use it to tone down the loudness that comes out of rings, because rings seems to put out a very hot signal a lot. So I tone it down sometimes with Veils, or I'll do it down here now in the mixer I have down below. And the other thing Veils has done for me, more than not, I use Veils as an attenuator for CV, for reining in the sweep, the size of the sweep of the LFOs, like from Stages. Stages has a 0 to 8 volt or whatever it is sweep, and so I want it to be just 1 volt. I would then, of course, take the output to the input, put it up just a little bit, get my 1 volt out, and now it sweeps just a little bit. These Mutable Instruments modules have been my leaping off point into modular. They were the first. They're beautiful. They're super sexy. My very first rack, I actually kind of gave it a name. The name of it was Muty, because of these Mutable Instruments modules. I also have Monsoon up in the corner for effects that came in the first batch, and it's a Clouds clone, and Clouds was Mutable Instruments. So there's that too. That's why it is a very hard decision for me to come to here at the beginning of 2024. It's a very hard decision for me to come to say I am selling my Mutable Instruments collection. Now, when you're done gasping and falling over in shock, let me explain why, because there actually is a really valid reason why, and one of them is size. There are clones for marbles and rings, for instance, that are smaller. Even Plaits, there's one that's smaller. That might do a little better, since I am kind of running out of room, and I do not want to build another rack, because all that'll do is feed my urge to buy more modules, and I really want to stop buying modules at this point. Here's the real reason why, and that is I have a philosophy going into modular from here out. Actually, anything in my studio, all the equipment I have, I want to go with this net zero philosophy, which means if I want to buy something new, I have to sell something of equal or greater value in order to pay for that new thing. And the reason why is because I have a lot of money invested in this rack and all of this equipment, and I'm not using every single piece of it every single time, of course. So it's time to figure out what I don't use and start offloading some of these pieces and then trying something new. You can barely see in the bottom of this camera here, you can see I did buy a Volt Freak as a filter, and I have a Delta 5 from Cosmotronics here. So there are some new pieces that are creeping in 2024 already. So this means whatever I spend here needs to go somewhere else. And marbles, rings, veils, and stages are surprisingly selling for more than I purchased them for today. So I want to kind of strike while the iron's hot, get these off to some other better home, somebody who wants the original Mutable Instruments versions of these, and I'll replace marbles and rings because I could not live without marbles and rings. But I'll replace marbles and rings with like Cara and micro rings right away, probably from After Later Audio, because I really love After Later Audio stuff. Anyway, so what I was going to do today is just quickly run through some of my favorite things to do with these modules, because I haven't really done a demo on these in a while. And this is where it's all going to fall apart because I don't have a plan. So let me go grab my wire carousel and see if we can get something patched up. So right now I have Plaits plugged into the mixer down here, and it's just belching out a little tone. But I want to put something else in there. I'm going to put, I'm going to take marbles out into Plaits and make it do some melody. So to start with, we're going to take something out of X, which are pitches, into volt per octave on Plaits. Then I'm going to take a T, which is a trigger, out of marbles. I'm going to just stick it in level to start with. And then I'm going to turn on my clock. I do have clock fed from Pamela's, just so marbles is under control. All right, I'm going to turn up the volume on Plaits now. It's getting notes from marbles here, and it's getting gates kind of open and close from marbles on the T side. I have it running into the performance mixer down below. I'm now going to mix in a little reverb. And sometimes that can sound fantastic, right? But using marbles over here, we can then speed up the clock dividers by turning the divisor up, or we can ask it to do more things on the T side than on the T3 side than on the T1 side. Turning down the jitter will give you just more timed hits. Let me kill some of that reverb. I sped up Pamela's new workout to just run this clock a little faster. So I'm going to throw the jitter back in. So the whole point of that is to just show marbles is now running Plaits through the level jack, which is just the built-in VCA. So it is opening and closing the VCA to letting sound out. If I switch this over to trig, it'll be a lot more plucky. And you can change the envelope of the built-in VCA here by holding the left button down here and then turning the morph knob or the timbre knob. So that's pretty cool stuff. Plaits has got a ton of configuration built in with holding these buttons. Like another one real quick is holding down the right button and then twisting the harmonics knob will lower the octaves. Then we have, of course, timbre and morph that are just out here without any button presses, changing the tone of the sound that's being selected right now. And this is where LFOs come in handy, right? So I'm going to come over here to my friend Stages. I'm going to put one of the channels into LFO, or two of the channels into LFO mode real quick, like this. And you can see the amount of the speed that the lights are blinking on and off is the speed of the LFO. So I'm just going to take this back over here to timbre, and this one over here to morph. And then I'm going to attenuate them right here. So now you have this interesting morphing sound. Turn down the reverb a little bit more. So that's pretty cool. Again, how much you can do with this is kind of silly. All right, so I want the micro camera now to be focusing on Ornament and Crime. So what I'm going to do right now is take a voltage out of Ornament and Crime up above and just stick it into this thing called Model over here. Now Model is what they call all of these sound patches in here. You can walk them with the buttons. Or you can send a voltage in here. You can send a voltage in, and right now I've got it at 0 volts. You can see up on the top camera here, you can see I'm at 0 volts right now. I'm going to turn the knob just to 0.16 volts. And you see how Plaits moves to the next model. So it's about every 1.6-ish volts, it bumps the model down one more. So that's pretty cool. Again, you can use sequencers to change the model in your sequence as your song is playing and you want to try something different. You could send precise voltage into model, and you could send precise voltage into morph and timbre, FM, or even harmonics over here. If you want to get experimental. So the other interesting part is when you get up to twirl this up till it gets down to the bottom. That's the vowel engine. So right at 1.5 volts, it switches to the next bank, and the next bank was red. And the red bank was kind of like percussive or bells, you know, something percussive sounding like that. So now we can walk through some of these. Some bells. Little organ sounds there. Some sounds a little weird, doesn't it? But you'll notice when you get down to about 3 volts, that's it. You can't go any further. However, Plaits does have a third bank now. So what was interesting to me is that everything about Plaits seems to be unipolar, meaning it's all positive voltage, until you need to change the models to the third bank. And this is something I literally just discovered as I was prepping for this video, is because I've never done this before. So now we're rolling back into the orange bank, or the amber bank, and the amber bank is all the new stuff. It knocks the ball out of the park as far as what Plaits can do. Let me turn that down a little bit. The amber bank here, the newest thing that was added in one of the final firmware updates, adds so much functionality to Plaits, it's almost mind-boggling, just in the sounds alone. So some of them are like, they say DX7 patches. You could literally load a DX7, Yamaha DX7 Sysx into Plaits through the timbre jack and play that DX7 sound on your Plaits module. It was kind of an insane update, and I think everybody was pretty darn happy. So here we're getting into DX7 territory. So when we're in this bank, I believe the harmonics knob chooses 1 to 32 patches per bank. And plucky, they've got some plucky stuff. And so only for banks 3 and 4 does harmonics turn into a or a patch selector. I think the rest of the time it goes back into harmonics mode. And then of course we're topped out at negative 1.58 volts is the first patch of the third bank. So if I wanted to take a third LFO and stick it into Harmo over here and turn this guy into an LFO by long pressing and then turning up the speed. So now one more final interesting thing that I guess I can do with plates. I'm going to grab a sample and hold from my other favorite tool up here called the Modbox. It's off the screen a little bit, but I want to just stick this into the model jack. So now sample and hold is going to be randomly generating 0 to 10 volts or something like that. So it's going to be constantly changing the models. Let me speed this up a bit. So you can see the lights dancing around. So another thing you can do with modulating the model jack is just have it jump all over the place. And again, these are all very basic things that I've done with plates over the last few years. Nothing super fancy going on here for me. All right, so there's my plates module and some basic LFOs and some basic randoms going into it, getting pitches and gates or triggers from marbles over yonder, and just making some noise, and then throwing a lovely reverb in there. And you can just do anything you damn well please right here. All right. So marbles is something they call a random sampler, and I think the best way to give it a real superficial explanation is it's kind of similar to a Turing machine in a way. We have a knob here that's labeled Deja Vu, which is a way to get it to lock into whatever pattern it just created and repeat. Moving Deja Vu to the left or right does allow it to create all new random patterns or randomize within the pattern that it already has generated. So it's similar a lot to my Alan Turing machine up top. But where marbles takes it, of course, Mutable Instruments, marbles kicks it up a notch into an entirely different plane with things like bias on the T side, which is triggers, and on the voltage side, which is voltage output here. So on the voltage side, the higher the knob is, the more higher voltages are generated. So it'd be, instead of it being like a 1 or 2 volts, it'll be a 3 or 4 volt kind of thing. And these are it stays within these ranges. Whereas if you turn it down below the center, it will generate lower voltages for lower tones, for instance, for pitches. So on this side here, there is a T1, T2, and T3. T2 is in the same tempo as the clock, so as the clock is ticking, this will tick at the same speed as the clock, always. So this is the same as the clock. Whereas this T1 and T3 alternate. Depending on the mode it's in, they alternate. If 1 is lit up, 3 is not. If 3 is lit up, 1 is not, etc. And you can make more 3s by turning it up this way. You can make more 1s by turning it down that way. So it's pretty basic. Marbles does go super deep with a lot more stuff, but this is just general stuff I'm talking about here, and how I use it primarily in just generating triggers and pitches. Here is something called jitter, which is kind of like putting a little delay in the step, or causing it to be a little bit more human, where it will not be exact metered like this blinking light here. So I'll show you what that sounds like when I get a tone coming out of this guy. As far as pattern lengths go, there's this knob in the center for 1 to 16. I think it is. My eyes are kind of bad. And then down here is the scale or steps. So I think it's stepped voltages on the right side, and then below on the left side, it is slewed voltages. So in order to hear what any of that sounds like, let me plug it into Plaits again real quick. So this will be the same patch we just had a moment ago. T3 into triggers, and X3 into volt per octave of Plaits. And then I'll start my clock. So if you watch the T3 here, whenever that lights up, a trigger gets fired. So if I turn up the bias on the triggers, you'll just hear more triggers being generated. If I turn it down, less T3s get generated, but more T1s get generated. So to show the difference between the two of these, I'm going to take a trigger, take the trigger out of T1 this time. I'm going to stick it into strum on rings. You can see rings has already started firing away. I'm then going to take X1 and plug it into volt per octave of rings. So now rings is being asked to generate volt per octave resonant sounds from marbles as well. So let me get a patch out of here to the mixer. So this is now rings, which I'll talk about rings again in a moment, a little bit more in detail. Right now I just want to make some noise. Let me bring down the reverb. I'm going to pan Plaits to the left. I'm going to pan rings to the right. And bring the reverb way down. So what I want to show you here is, again, the triggers are being generated from marbles into two different instruments or two different modules here. And because the bias is set down, that means rings is going to trigger more than Plaits. If I put it in the middle, they might balance out a little bit better. So you kind of hear that, how that's working. So you won't hear rings if Plaits is playing, and vice versa. And no, they're not in tune, but that's okay because that's not the demonstration. So now I'm going to turn up this thing called jitter. And wouldn't you know, it's jittering. I'm going to turn down Deja Vu to about 9 o'clock. So most of this to just show that the two different T sides, trigger sides, two different X sides, and there's still one in the middle. There's still X2 there's still T2 and X2 to drive a third oscillator or a third thing that takes voltage. So it's pretty awesome. And then there's a fourth thing here in the center called Y, which I think is just a slewing up and down constant shape that's happening. I haven't played with that too much in 2.5 years. I haven't done much with that. But anyway, we're not going to look at that today because I don't know much about it. So here's another thing to talk about. I'm gonna turn the pitch bias down. 9 o'clock. So now the voltages that are being generated are lower in pitch. Voltage is lower versus if I turn it up high. You can hear higher pitches being generated. And then the last thing is, of course, this steps knob. The higher you go, the more I think static it is. Right here, it's chromatic. I think it's every pitch. As you go up higher, it could be just octaves, like this. And then if you go the other way, below 12 o'clock, you start slewing. So some of the things I have not gotten into with marbles is, of course, exploring all these other modes. Mutable Instruments is really good with green, amber, and red modes for things. So almost every one of these has a green, amber, and red mode. Some of these are pretty sensible. Like if I get back onto the pitches side or the stepped side and tick this knob here, it's just the range of pitches being generated, which is now -5 to +5, so it's a 10-volt range. So it's all over the place, versus 1, -1, +1, that kind of thing. I don't know the exact voltages. They're in the manual. Go check them out. So, and another thing that I've seen people do, but I haven't done myself, is of course modulating all these jacks here. These are all modulation points. You could modulate the bias, both of them. You can modulate the spread. There's also you can modulate the steps. So sometimes you can switch it from steps mode to slew mode. You can modulate jitter. You can modulate deja vu, which is this guy up here, which you can send a gate into here and lock, just like with Turing Machine, you could lock the pattern in to stay in whatever it is until you lower the gate and unlock it. And there's self-patching options here. You could take, this is again just voltage coming out of here, so there's nothing that says you can't use a voltage you're generating to tell it to do something else. And then it winds up becoming a generative machine. If it's telling itself to modulate its parameters, it really becomes quite a little beast. I'm just going to move on to rings right now, because rings with marbles are literally one of my favorite things to do in all of Modular. With all the crap I have, I do these the most because some pretty beautiful sounds come out of rings alone when marbles is strumming it. So let's hear what some of that looks like. I'm just going to turn on the clock real quick as I talk about the parameters. So here we have a frequency, which is of course the tuning of rings. There is a structure, which you can't hear right now because I haven't changed the modes yet, but we'll look more into that in a moment. There's a brightness. So brightness is, of course, how many harmonics you can hear. There's a damping knob here. So damping is like a sustain pedal, I guess, in a way. Turn it down, it gets kind of plucky. So the higher you bring damping, the longer the tones will ring out. And then finally you have a thing called position, which I believe is in the buffer that it's capturing. This is where you're reading the data from. Now this parameter here is actually pretty interesting. Now let me bring these back down. Position is really interesting, and it's actually something I only kind of discovered in the last 6 months or so, and it was by accident. I actually did not listen to somebody else's video for a change. But if I take an LFO, like let's come over here out of stages, if I come into position, CV on rings, and I've got a LFO running over here, let's speed it up a little. You can kind of get an interesting tone going on here. Let me speed up my LFO. Oops, hold on, let me speed up my LFO. So you can kind of get almost a little vibrato thing happening here, a little chorus thing. Where you hear this a lot better is if we switch modes, which I'll talk about now. So Rings has a mode on this side, which is like a monophonic, and then a duophonic, and they called it a quadraphonic mode here, which basically means 4 tones can be played simultaneously, sort of, to make strumming kind of effects. And now there aren't really 4 voices coming out of it. All it means is that the tails don't get cut off because things are buffered 4 times. So running mode, I'm usually in the duophonic mode here. And then on this side over here, it is bells or tones, or it is sympathetic strings, or it is unharmonic strings. I'm not sure what that is. I don't really use that too much either. But now, if you listen to the same sound I just made here, let me go back to this real quick. Let me turn off that little chorus effect for just a moment. So listen to this for a minute. You hear what that sounds like. I'm going to put both of these, I'm going to switch modes for both of these and listen to the change. You ready? All right, let me kill jitter for just a moment while we play with this. So now again, this is my favorite mode of Rings and Marbles together, is this tones that it's generating here. And eventually, as it plays for a while, believe it or not, Marbles will actually start generating notes that are actually harmonic with each other, and it starts sounding like a real song. Right now it's still a little wacky. It's gonna make a liar out of me. Fortunately, you all, if you've watched any of my videos, you know that I have actually made music with just these 2 modules and the reverb, and they do actually sound good. I'm gonna crank up some reverb. And now I'm going to turn this chorus effect back on, or what I'm calling the chorus effect. Let me pull out my Pamela's clock and just go with the internal clock. I do have this panned left and right, but if I bring them a little bit more into the center, so you can move the structure around to get different harmonics to show up as well, depending on what you want to do. What I do with this a lot is I will patch random voltages into brightness and damping, which might look a little something like, let's take another sample and hold from above here and just drop it into brightness. So what this will do is, based on sample and hold, is it'll make the sound brighter or duller based on what is being generated over there. So another one I can do is damping. Into an LFO from up here that is like a slope. I'll bring it way down and then I'll attenuate it up. Let's do that with both of them. So all this really does is it just attenuates or kind of randomizes the sound coming out of this module. So it's almost like a shrink and grow in a way. And don't forget our LFO over here making our little chorus effect. So anyway, it seems like right this moment, Marbles is not going to generate the beautiful music that I want it to. And it's probably because it knows it's going to be sold. So it's revolting. If I switch it up into the quadraphonic mode, we can speed it up a little bit more. So you could literally have this running in the background, just being almost like a picking sound that on occasion will burp out a tune when the voltage says so. So Veils again is a VCA, quad VCA, or attenuator. It's got the attenuators are here. It's got shapes, I think up is what these are up here, and then it's got these offsets down here. You stick an audio in here, and the audio will come out here depending on how you want to use it. You could put a CV in here for a gate, turn it on and off like you would expect a VCA to work. So to show that real quick, I'm going to move back over to Plaits. Take this left and right out of channels 1 and 2 of Veils. Oh, I need this one into volt per octave over here. I'm going to take this one out of Marbles. So this trigger again out of Marbles, I'm going to put into a stack cable because I'm going to cheat right now and just shortcut this by jumping it from 1 to 2 here. So now 1 and 2 both get the same gates. 1 and 2 will get the same triggers or gates from Marbles to open to let the VCA through. I'm going to take these two left and right out of Plaits over here to Veils, which is the audio in. So now what you see is audio coming out of Plaits into Veils, coming out of Veils to the mixer, but you won't hear anything until a trigger happens over here on Marbles. So now in this case, you'll watch the light on Marbles and the lights of these LEDs bleep, which means it's opening up the envelope to let Plaits through. I'm not using Plaits level or trigger in this case. This is all Marbles telling this to open, letting the sound through. So that's one way to use it. Another way to use it is to take this whatever's coming, like an LFO, out of stages, for instance. And then I want to take whatever that LFO is and take it out to timbre, for instance, right next door. And now I can use this attenuator to adjust how much, even though there's an attenuator right here, I can use the attenuator to adjust how much voltage I want to send through. So the lower the attenuator, the lower amount of voltage is coming through. This is useful on modules that don't have their own built-in attenuators, of course. Like maybe something like Model. Let's use this for Model instead, shall we? So right now Model is stuck here at the first model. I guess the first model. If I turn up this, we turn down the LFO real quick just to be a little slower. If I start raising this, you can kind of see how much voltage is being allowed through. There's about 1 volt being allowed through here. If I raise this higher, and if higher again, it's now going to go all the way into the next bank. It's literally cycling through programs, basically, back and forth. So this is not really to show what I would do with this. This is just to show what attenuating an LFO that actually has a maximum peak up and down. You can actually control it with this, similar to how you would use an attenuator on a module or through Batumi or pretty much any other DC coupled attenuator. And honestly, that's all I have to show about Veils, because I never really got really deep with it. I know my initial episode of Veils was pretty shitty because it was kind of small, short like this, in fact, because that's all it does. It's all it really does for me. I don't know that it does too much more than this. There's something to do with shapes up here that I don't know very much about. And then, of course, the offsets just mean be louder. It's like offset gain. Or we can offset the amount of voltage coming through. Anyway. All right, so for the last guy on our list, we have Mutable Instruments Stages here. Stages is what's called a segment generator. This thing does so much that I am not even going to try to explain it all. I don't even know what half of it does. So hang on, let me just look at the document on the Kaimem/Eurorack repository on GitHub. Kaimem? I'm not sure how you even say that. I'll put a link in the description. But anyway, there's this alternative firmware up there. I'll see if I can put part of this on the screen as well. But what this does is it takes it just enhances the Stages module to do so much more, like bipolar LFOs, because as I said, most Mutable Instrument stuff seems to be unipolar, meaning it's 0 to plus some positive voltage, whereas bipolar goes negative into past 0 and into positive. So here's a thing that I literally just learned this very moment as I was filming this video. The thing I just learned is that if you hold this button down, for any of the channels, let me put it in LFO real quick. So it's blinking quickly there. You see it's in LFO mode. By holding it, like long pressing a channel, puts this channel into LFO mode. And if you also hold this button even for just a moment and then jiggle the pot, I'm going to need a second hand. Hold on here. All it says to do is wiggle the pot. So I think it's a toggle. If you push the button and turn the pot at all, it now is going into a bipolar mode. So the plus voltage past 0 to negative voltage. So if you remember, I was just talking about taking one of these out and putting it into an attenuverter so you could offset it to negative LFO, because this is only a unipolar output, and I was wrong. Literally 2.5 years later, I am learning that this can be, in fact, a bipolar output. This is another reason why I probably am going to sell Stages at this point, is because I've had it for 2.5 years. I've done absolutely nothing with it except for make LFOs. And anytime I needed a negative voltage LFO, I'd run it up here to my attenuverter and offset it to the negative, because I was too dumb to read the documentation. Other things that this enhanced firmware can do is it can do very slow or very fast LFOs. Stages from the factory has about this kind of LFO speed. You can slow it down, and it'll be, I don't know, maybe a 20-second cycle or something like that. But if you wanted this to be slower, you hold the button and drop the slider real quick. And now this is a super slow, look how much slower the light's blinking. It's a super slow LFO. So the light coming on, of course, means we're at the peak of we're up here at the peak of the signal, and then when the light's off, we're at the bottom of the signal. Voltage. Sorry, I keep saying signal. I mean voltage. Anyway, so if I hold the button again and wiggle the pot, or wiggle the attenuator up, now look how fast it's going. This is now audio rate LFO. How do I know it's audio rate? Well, let's plug something in. So if this is supposed to be an audio rate LFO, and there it is. It's getting all audio rate up in there. Throw my reverb back in. All right, so I think I made my point. So some other stuff in here is also random segment types, arbitrarily slowed clocks, hold and step segment quantization, probabilistic gates are in here. It's kind of nuts. Delay, attack, hold, decay, sustain, release, envelope shapes, because there's six channels. So something I found that was interesting about stages, and I'm not going to be able to demonstrate this because I don't remember how to do it, but the thing I do remember about stages is that everything works from the right to the left. So if you want a 4-stage ADSR, for instance, you would plug something into the fourth from the right, and now this is your attack, decay, sustain, and release values. And you trigger it with the CV here. I don't know how to do that, so I'm not going to waste my time doing that right now because I don't use this. I don't use this for these kinds of things. The interesting part I can leave you with is that if you plug in, I'm just going to pretend these are outputs. I can plug in 3 outputs here into number 2, number 4, number 6, going again right to left, and now I have attack, decay, attack, decay, attack, and decay. So I have three short little AD envelopes or AR envelopes right here from just plugging this in differently and setting the pots up a little bit differently. So I guess what I'm trying to say is stages is really immense and really complex, and I wound up only using it for 2.5 years as an LFO. So that's a super huge waste of potential. I've got Batumi right here for LFOs. I've got a couple other LFO related things in the rack now. So I think it's time for me to let that go. And it's also selling for around $420 US right now. So why not seize that opportunity? So I think that's it. I don't think there's anything more I want to say about my first modules in Eurorack. I'm not sure if this information was interesting to anybody, but it felt like it's something that I wanted to do, especially if I'm going to say goodbye to a number of my first modules ever. Plaits I'm definitely going to keep because I think there's a sentimental value tied to the first oscillator I ever owned. I don't know if I want to get rid of that. But the other guys all are selling for pretty high value right now, and I want to replace rings and marbles with a clone because they're smaller. And I would never be able to live without marbles and rings in my system because they themselves are just amazing, absolutely amazing modules I use all the time. Clones will replace them. I really don't use veils and stages at all anymore. So, yep, I think that's it. So thank you for watching.